Hey everybody, welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. So we finally made it to Season 3. This will be my first Warband review of Season 3, and as you can imagine, I'm going to be taking a look at Grashrak's Despoilers. We're just rampant, chaotic beastmen, always looking for things to kill, things to slaughter, and they ended up in Beastgrave, just hoping to accomplish that goal. And as I always do, I'm going to be taking a look at this Warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, and I'm going to rate them and compare them to the throng of other warbands that I've rated thus far on that ranking scale of S to D. So I'm going to start by looking at this warband's fighter cards, and there are a lot of them. I mean, this is a pretty big warband. There's 6 units. They all have the same difficult inspire mechanic in which 2 or more enemy fighters are taken out of action, which is definitely not that easy to achieve, especially when we take a closer look at these units. I'm going to start by taking a look at Grashrak himself, the leader, who will definitely spend most of his time in this game uninspired as a level 1 wizard, doing 2 damage off of 2 hammers with decent move, terrible defense, only 1 dodge, and 4 wounds, but he does have that nice ritual counter mechanic, which allows him or allies to re-roll attack dice. And if you do manage to get this guy inspired, he gets cleave, his wizard level increases, and that's pretty much it. Next we have Draknar, which is basically this warband's version of Psy-X, so 2 hammers, 3 damage, uninspired, which is very nice. Gets a bit more accurate with 3 swords and cleave when inspired. Pretty easy to take out of action though with the 1 shield defense and only 3 wounds. Next is Gnarl, who's the first of this warband's units who actually has the hunter keyword. Has a short bow, has a flint axe, not very accurate, not a lot of damage, low wounds, low defense, okay movement. Gets a little bit more accurate with his flint axe when inspired, so obviously not very exceptional. Korsh the Sneak is kind of cool. Similarly, not very accurate until he's inspired with 3 swords. Only does 1 damage. Gets a bit more defensive, which is nice, going up to 2 dodge if he manages to inspire. And does have a sort of hidden path special ability where if he happens to be on an edge hex and hasn't moved, then you could put him on any edge hex and then give him a charge token. Next is the most solid of the hunters, which is Murgoth Halfhorn. Not very accurate, but has decent damage, so 2 swords, 2 damage, going to 3 swords if he manages to get inspired. Also pretty easy to take out of action with only 3 wounds and 1 dodge defense. And finally there's Ushkor, the final hunter, who is kind of like Grawl, but is more aligned for ranged attacks when inspired, getting 3 swords and ensnare with his short bow. Alright, so that does it for this warband's fighter cards, which have quite a few pros. I mean, they have 2 special combat abilities, Cleave and Ensnare, if these guys manage to get inspired. They also have 2 unique abilities, like the Ritual Counter for Grashrak and Korsh's Sneak special ability. They have a Spellcaster, they have the Hunter keyword, they have pretty good movement, I mean 4 is not bad. They do have ranged capabilities, which certainly isn't the case for all warbands. And they have a high model number with 6, which does give them some flex play potential, allow them to kind of hold objectives while making attacks. But this warband certainly does come with its cons. Mostly they're low defense and generally low wounds, and they're not exceptional damage. I mean, aside from Draknar, none of these guys really hit hard, even when inspired. And their inspiring mechanic is tough, especially considering their low damage. I mean, definitely not easy to take 2 units out of action, especially if you're facing some low unit warbands. And unfortunately, with the high model number, that also means many targets for your enemy to take out of action. And with their low defense and generally low wounds, they can be pretty easy pickings. So that does it for my analysis of the fighter cards. Now I'm going to take a look at this warband's objective cards. They actually have many score immediate cards. I'm going to start with the first, which is Bestial Cunning, worth 1 glory point. Score this immediately when you play your 3rd or subsequent gambit in a single round, which is a great card. I'm ranking this as an S, very likely to get pulled off. And next is Despoilers, for 2 glory points as a surge. Scores immediately after an activation if your warband holds 3 or more objectives. So a faction-specific temporary victory, which is an amazing card, definitely worth an S for its ranking. Killing Blow, worth 1 glory. Score this immediately when a friendly fighter's attack action that targets a fighter that has no wounds tokens takes the fighter out of action. I'm giving this a B. Definitely not a guaranteed score considering the low damage and not exceptional accuracy of this warband. If you're fighting a horde warband though, this becomes pretty likely to get pulled off. Next is Raiders. Score this immediately after an activation if 3 or more friendly fighters are in enemy territory, worth 1 glory. So encourages some aggressive play. I'm giving that a B, could be worth an A. Really depends on when you draw this card because your guys are going to drop fast. And finally, we got Stampede. Score this immediately when a 3rd or subsequent fighter makes a charge action in the same phase, worth 1 glory. I mean, pretty likely to get pulled off with the decent movement and the ranged options. Just might conflict a bit with your intentions to hold on to objective tokens. So that does it for the Surge. For score in the end phase, we have Blood Ritual worth 1. Scores in an end phase if there are 2 or more ritual counters on your leader's fighter card. So pretty reliable to pull off, especially early game. Since you start with 1 ritual token, take 1 guy out, get 2. If you are in a situation where you can just hold off spending it until round number 2, then this becomes a pretty guaranteed glory in the end phase. Next is Bloodshed. Scores in the end phase if 3 or more enemy fighters are out of action, worth 2. So tricky, might be worth a B. I gave it an A because it definitely complements a style of just charging and trying to slaughter things, but if you draw this in the first round, it's pretty unlikely to get pulled off. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I would actually rank it as a B, so I'm going to just veto my A here. Next is Conquerors. Scores in an end phase if your warband holds 1 or more objectives in enemy territory, worth 1 glory. So pretty nice, not terribly difficult to pull off, although you have to hold it by the end phase, and with the low wounds and low defense, it's not too hard to either have your units get killed or just knocked off those objective tokens, so definitely not a guarantee. Next is Proven Superiority. Duels. Score this in end phase if enemy leaders are out of action and your leader is not out of action, worth 2 glory. So pretty cool. Encourages killing enemy leaders, which is definitely not the strong suit of this warband though, so I'm going to give it a B because it could get pulled off if you gear your deck well enough towards offense. Survival of the Fittest, worth 2 glory points. Scores an end phase if there are 1 or more surviving friendly fighters and 5 or more fighters are out of action, worth 2 glory. So I find this card is pretty cool actually. It sort of reminds me of Garrick's Reavers with the whole, charging, trying to kill, don't really care that much if you die. And your guys definitely will die. And having 5 guys be dead certainly is not unreasonable, so I'm going to give this an A. Swarm the Battlefield. Scores an end phase if there are 1 or more friendly fighters in each of the following: your territory, enemy territory, and no one's territory. So Eyes of the Nine has a similar card. It's not that great. It's only worth 1. Requires 3 of your units to be on board for this one, so I'm giving that a B. Might be worth a C. And finally, we have Taint of Ruin. Scores an end phase if your warband casts 2 or more spells in the preceding action phase, worth 1. Not easy to pull this one off. I'm giving it a B, but I don't know why I gave it a B. I really should be giving this a C because these guys don't even have a spell attack action. Grashrak is a level 1 wizard until he's inspired, which is not easy to pull off anyway. So yeah, C for this card. I'm backtracking a lot on my rankings here. So anyway, that does it for my overview, I guess, of objective cards, which typically promote playing Gambit cards, holding objectives, attacking enemies, namely their leader, or dying trying, protecting your leader, charging, having presence in all territories, and casting spells. So let's move on to the power cards. Starting with the ploys. These guys have ploys, spells, and upgrades. First ploy is Baying Anger. +1 dice for the first range 1 or 2 attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation. So a nice reliable increase in accuracy, so I'm going to give this a B. Next is Baying Hatred. +1 damage for the first range 1 or 2 attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation. Similarly, give it a B. It's just reliable, although obviously not guaranteed to be successful. Next is Berserk Bellow. Choose an enemy fighter adjacent to a friendly fighter and push them up to 1 hex, and up to 1 additional hex for each wound token the friendly fighter has. So pretty cool, especially if you play this card following a charge on a guy who's taking quite a bit of damage. You can throw him really far across the battlefield, probably through lethal hexes, so I'm going to give this an A. Next is Blood Taunt. Choose a friendly fighter. They are dealt 1 damage, give them a guard token, +2 dice for the first attack action made by the fighter in the next activation. I'm giving this an A as well. It's nice. Guard token is probably not going to be super useful because most likely you'll be charging, but +2 dice is very nice. Bull Charge. The first attack action made by a friendly fighter as part of a charge in the next activation has innate swords. So very good for Draknar if he actually survives long enough to inspire. So I'm going to give this a B, although it might be worth a C because Baying Anger is a little bit more reliable. Next is Skirmisher. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's move action, but not as part of a charge action. That fighter can make a range 3 attack action. I'm giving this, I think I've been too generous. This is worth a C because the 1 damage attacks from these range dudes with mostly 2 swords for accuracy. And all this card does is give you the benefit of not having to charge, so you can get a second shot, I guess. I mean, it's really not that good. So B or C, probably C. Vile Invaders. Choose up to 2 friendly hunters and push each of them 2 hex. That one's very nice. I'm giving this an A. Works very well with their objective holding cards. We got Weight and Numbers. +1 damage to the first attack action made by a friendly hunter in the next activation. If there are 1 or more supporting hunters, so very circumstantial bonus to damage. Definitely not as good as their other card. I'm giving this a C. And that does it for ploys. Next are spells. Bestial Vigor. requires a focus to cast, and if cast, friendly fighters have +2 move in the next activation. So spectral wings, but dependent on a successful cast. I'm giving this a B. And finally, Devolve requires a crit roll. If cast, choose an enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. They're dealt 1 damage and then push them up to 1 hex, closer to the caster. So I'm giving that a D. Really unlikely to get pulled off and definitely not worth the risk considering what its effects are. And that does it for the gambits, which typically improve attack accuracy, improve or cause damage, promotes supporting each other, promotes pushing friendly and enemy fighters, attacking while moving, improving defense, and increasing movement. So next we have the upgrades, starting with blinding attack. Restricted to Ush Core, 3 swords, 1 damage, doing an extra damage if you attack an adjacent enemy with this weapon upgrade. I'm giving it a C mostly because it's restricted to Ush Core. Next is Blood Craze, +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 and range 2 attack actions if this fighter has 1 or more wound tokens and or is adjacent to a fighter that has 1 or more wound tokens. So a conditional bonus to damage. I'm giving it a B. Great strength is just more reliable. Next is Cursed Flint. 3 swords, 1 damage cleave, restricted to a hunter. Pretty accurate melee attack, but definitely not exceptional. That's worth a C. Dogged Survivor. As a reaction, after an attack action that targets this fighter and fails, push this fighter up to 2 hexes, restricted to Korsh. Well, realistically, no attack against Korsh is going to fail. Maybe when he's inspired, but I'm giving this a C. Could be worth a D. Endless Hatred. As a reaction, after this fighter's attack action that takes an enemy fighter out of action, this fighter makes another attack action. You can only use this reaction once per round. So restricted to Gnarl, who probably isn't taking anybody out of action in the first place. I'm going to give it a C. Might be worth a D. Heedless to Pain. +1 wound, unique to Draknar or Murgoth. I'm giving it an A, although I don't really see the need to restrict it, but it's still a +1 wound. Next is Jabbing Spear, +1 range to this fighter's short spear attack actions, restricted to Murgoth and Korsh. I mean, I guess it gives him more range. I gave it a B, but I mean, it could be worth a C. Next is Savage Bolt, which is actually pretty nice. It gives a spell attack action to the leader with knockback 1, doing an extra damage on a crit. Only really useful when he's inspired because otherwise his wizard level is very low, but still a nice attack action. So I'm just going to give this an A. Next is Sorcerer's Trinket. Restricted to Fellhoof the leader, you can re-roll 1 dice in the casting roll each time this player attempts to cast a spell, which is nice if you combine it with Savage Bolt, but this guy really isn't that well oriented towards casting spells, honestly. So I'll give it a B. And finally, Trophy Taker, restricted to Draknar, basically allowing him to gain an extra glory for taking adjacent enemies out of action, which is pretty nice. So I'm giving that an A. And that does it for this overview here of the upgrades, which typically promote causing additional damage, pushing friendly fighters, improving wounds, an out-of-turn attack action, improving range, a spell attack action, improving attack accuracy, gaining additional glory points, and providing some unexceptional weapon upgrades, with the exception of Savage Bolt, which is pretty good. And here is my big overview, and some of these rankings, I mean, you could probably lower the tier for them, as I mentioned as I was actually analyzing them, but objective cards of this Warband are actually pretty good. I mean, they have 2 S tier, 4 A tier. They do have solid objective cards. There's no real debate there. Gambits and upgrades are definitely not terrible. They have some that are very good. And Skirmisher actually might be worth an S. Pushing 2 guys, 2 hexes each is pretty powerful. But anyway, this is the overview. Might be tweakable, and that's all I really have to say about that. So with this in mind, let's take a big overall look at this Warband and rate them on that scale of S to D. So my first comment is that these guys have an Inspire condition that is difficult to achieve. It requires them to be effective at aggression, which they're not necessarily strong at, until they're inspired. So there's a bit of a disconnect and a problem there. These guys also have many low wound units, and they have low defense, terrible defense. However, they are sort of like Garruk's Reavers in the sense they can benefit from losing fighters or getting wounded. So, I mean, it obviously doesn't completely balance out, but at least, you know, it's a bit thematic, and there are some positives to it. They're also very versatile. They have good flex options available to them, and they have many hunters, which provides them access to certain universal cards. But they have a very weak spell game, which, you know, definitely affects their versatility. And finally, they do have quite strong cards, especially objective cards, and they do have many strong power cards that promote many effective playstyles. So their cards overall, I would say, are strong, definitely stronger than average. Objective and power cards, that is. So with this in mind, I decided to give this Warband, surprisingly, a rank of A, but not a strong ranking of A. I'm actually putting these guys as the weakest ranked A warbands. I do believe that they're above B because they do have a nice set of cards to complement their playstyle. But they also are very flawed and definitely do need a boost of some sort. I just wouldn't say they need as large a boost as anything in the rank of B would require. I'd also say that I do put them a fair ways behind Molog. I think Molog, is a lot more solid warband than Grashrak's Despoilers. So anyway, that does it for my overview. So I hope you enjoyed. In the description, I'm going to be posting a link to the balancing videos, basically the recommendations that will never be taken seriously, but that's fine. I just do this for fun, as to how I think Games Workshop should be modifying the rules for Grashrak's Despoilers to make them more competitive, to help balance everything out with all the other warbands that I've balanced. You can look into that video if you guys are interested in that kind of thing. And anyway, I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have a nice day.